So our first bill is House File 2183, and I want to first thank Representative Elkins for carrying this bill, as he has done, I think, a couple of biennia. And it is a large and complicated bill, and so we'll go through it and hear some public testimony and then proceed with questions. I'm going to move that this bill be laid over for possible inclusion in our omnibus finance bill, and I'll have some comments later once we hear the testimony. But I want to get right to it, and welcome to the committee, Representative Elkins, again with a big thank you for your work on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes. So when my freshman year, Senator Jasinski and I were both as freshmen assigned to take on this issue. I actually think that the issue's been around long enough that I think Representative Lead Petersburg has actually had previous versions of this bill as well, if I'm not mistaken, and he's a co-author of the bill this year, and we also have bipartisan authorship in the Senate with both Senator Dibble and Senator Jasinski being the authors of the bill this year. So in 2021, we commissioned an independent expert review study that was done by Rick King, head of the I can't remember, Technology Advisory Committee now is what it's called, and some of his colleagues were in. And I spent some time rereading it tonight to refresh myself as to the recommendations and the findings. So the basic problem we're looking at addressing is that over the last couple of years with our migration from the old failed MinLARS system to the new successful MinDrive system, the advent of Real ID, which added some significant additional requirements for people to get Real ID driver's licenses. The way we process registration and driver's licenses has actually changed quite a bit, but the fee structures and the allocation of revenue has not really changed to keep up with those changes. So when we implemented MinDrive, for example, we made a conscious decision that we were going to shift more of the workload from the back office to the front office. One of the problems in MinLARS is that the front offices, mostly the deputy registrar's offices, which are both a combination of both public and private, didn't have the ability to make corrections to records at the front desk, and so applications for whatever driver's licenses or vehicle registration would be completed and sent off to DVS for review. With the new system, instead of putting all of that work of double checking everything in the back office, the new system we're much more reliant on giving the deputy registrars at the front office the ability to make sure that those applications are correct at the time of entry while the customer is still standing in front of them. And so we've relieved a lot of the burden in the back office, shifted a lot of the workload to the front office, and then the advent of Real ID just further shifted that workload, because in order to get a Real ID, there are significant documentation requirements that are imposed by the federal government. You have to bring, the specific documents that you can bring to qualify for Real ID are very specific. And especially when Real ID was first implemented back even in the MinLARS era, we were frequently seeing cases where customers would come to the front desk with what they thought were complying documents and turned out not to be, and people were having to come to the front office multiple times to get it done. The transactions were extremely time consuming, and the DR offices were we're really strained. So I'll just give you my personal example. My wife and I went to apply for our Real IDs in early 2020, I guess, just before COVID hit. And my wife brought her Macy's bill as an ID. It had her name and address on it, but it was not acceptable because she'd already torn off the payment stub and mailed it in with the check. And in order to use the document, it had to be completely intact. But we went to the office that existed then in Bloomington, and the woman helping us behind the counter said, "Not a problem, I'll call my friend Julie in the utility department, and she'll she'll fax me over a copy of a utility bill, which is an acceptable form, which will be complete. And so we were able to get our real IDs processed on the first day that we arrived, but the transaction took 15 or 20 minutes. So in this bill, we're doing a bunch of related things to reflect all of this. So first of all, to give DVS and ourselves more flexibility in the funding, we're going to combine the two DVS fees into one. Representative Petersburg brought forward a standalone bill that we heard earlier in the session that would do that. We'll also do that as part of this bill as well. DVS has had problems with, having funds, money in their funds, but not necessarily in the right fund that they needed for a particular expenditure, or not having the appropriations from us that they needed in order to spend the money to, for example, hire back office staff. So I think we're going to take care of that. We're going to increase some of the fees to generate some additional revenue. And we're going to view the whole ecosystem here, DVS and the deputy registrars, as one ecosystem. And because one of the other big things that happened during COVID is many more of the transactions went from the front office to online, which is something that we want to encourage. It's more efficient, but a lot more of the revenue was going straight into DVS. A lot less of the revenue was going to the deputy registrars, and so were being stressed. And we've actually lost a lot of deputy registrar offices. Many of the public deputy registrar offices are suffering large deficits. I reached out to officials in Hennepin County, for example, and learned that on an annual basis, they're putting about $2.5 to $3 million a year of property tax money into supporting their driver and vehicle services offices. The office that I had gone to in Bloomington closed because it was suffering about a $300,000 a year annual deficit. And other counties are realizing proportionate losses as well that they're having to subsidize with property tax money as well. So I think we've got the House Research, a summary in here for you of the details. I don't want to walk through all of the really gory details. I'd rather just open things up for questions, because we've been hearing these bills for well over 4 years now.
Thank you very much, Representative Elkins. And when you referenced that you were a first-year member, so that certainly dates back to 2019, 2020 biennium. So thank you for that. Do any members have questions of the author?
Later.
Okay, we'll save those for later. Why don't we just get right into the testimony? So first on our list is Hong Zhang from DVS.
Assistant Commissioner Zhang is not present today, but Megan is going to be.
Okay, great. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. My name is Megan Gallagher. I'm the legislative analyst at Driver and Vehicle Services Division. Mr. Zhang wants to apologize for not being able to be here today, but I am certainly here to provide some information for the committee. There are several sections of this bill that DVS can absolutely administer as drafted, and then there are some requirements in this bill that we actually already have in place at DVS. That includes things like the real-time exam appointment availability and the use of the online pre-application process for credential applications. However, there are some parts of the bill that DVS has concerns with that could have potential unintended consequences, and we certainly look forward to working with the author and stakeholders and authors at the Senate to make sure that we end up with a bill that can be administered by DVS. Thank you.
Great. Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you explain or at least give us a brief description of those areas that you do have problems with?
So I don't, Mr. Chair, Representative Petersburg, I don't have a full list with me today, but one example would be in section 13 on page 9. There's a requirement there that every single person who enters the MinDrive system to look at a record and doesn't complete a transaction would need to make a note in the system. Currently, all deputy registrars and our e-services for business partners have that option to leave the note, but if we require it for every person, that would mean every law enforcement officer who enters the system and they hit the database thousands of times per day to retrieve data would need to leave a note. Any DVS employee who's going into the system to do their part of their regular duties but isn't completing transactions would need to leave a note every time. And that also adds some concerns for the MinDrive programming team in terms of how much data they would then need to store. And when they go in to actually make updates to the system and make the data accurate, they would need to leave notes every time they do that as well.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Petersburg. Are there other questions of DVS?
Can I just, Mr. Chair, on this issue, I mean, I think this stems from a general concern about kind of unauthorized access to the system, a deep privacy concern. I suspect that there are other much easier ways to address this issue.
Actually, Mr. Chair, Representative Elkins, thank you for pointing that out. Yes, currently there is the capacity in MinDrive. It already creates an audit trail, and we're able to see what people have accessed. Creating the note gives them the option to explain why they were there so that if there is an audit and they get asked about it, it's easier to explain and understand what happened. But requiring it is a whole different thing altogether. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a question then. So there is a lot of, in section 17, there are a lot of requests of the department. And and I think some of these seem to make a lot of sense. Others, I'm not so sure about. Do you have the capacity to do this? Do you have some direction on what you think would be priorities within this list and things that you think may not be needed or necessary? When I read the bill, I was just reminded how much is in this report, and so I wanted to get your comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, DVS would be happy to provide kind of what we think the priorities in that report would be. And we are looking into how many hours we think that it might take to draft something like this and the kind of expertise that it might require. I don't have, a priority list for you today, but certainly we would agree that there are parts of that report that maybe are less helpful than others. And we'd certainly be able to continue to work with the authors and the chair to get a report that would be really useful to you.
And then one final question for the department. So I know the data sharing issue has been one that, there's been some disagreement between you and the deputies on. Do you feel that there is some kind of a compromise or ways to address some of their concerns, but at the same time addressing, I think this becomes a financial issue for the department. Is there a way to is there a possibility to balance these things, which, seem to have been at least presented over the years as mutually exclusive?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you mean the fee sharing?
The fee sharing, sorry. I said data. Sorry about that. Fee
Yes,
sharing.
certainly.
The data sharing we don't want. Fee sharing.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely, DVS is willing to continue to work and discuss potential solutions to the revenue concerns that have been brought forward by the deputy registrars. We certainly continue to take the position that our deputies are a really important partner in the work that we do in providing this state service, and that the filing fees are what should be their source of income, and that's really where our focus has been. But we're absolutely willing to continue to work to find a compromise and something that works for both sides, knowing that we really believe that they should be paid for the work that they do through those filing fees.
Thank you. I would certainly encourage that. And I understand there are some different filing fee proposals kind of floating around, and we hope that they will be ready and available for us to consider when this bill comes back. Representative Elkins, I think you wanted to comment.
Yeah,
on that.
I think it's essential that we're, providing adequate funds for both, the front office and the back office, and that we need to end up with a solution where DVS's fund balances are adequate.
Good. Well, thank you very much for your testimony, and pleased to hear that the conversation continues. Okay, next we have Jim Hurst, who is here representing the Minnesota Deputy Registrars Association. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. For the record, my name is Jim Hurst. I'm here today on behalf of the Minnesota Deputy Registrars Association, which represents the vast majority of the current 168 deputy offices across the state. And I'm also here to relay similar concerns on behalf of the Deputy Registrar Business Owners Association, which is a group of deputy registrars who are primarily of the private business owners that are also part of the network of deputy registrars. First, I'd like to thank Representative Elkins for his tireless efforts, as you know, 4 years now trying to advance and enact legislation that would address the concerns of the deputy registrars. I thought his overview was very succinct and very well demonstrated and documented the issues that are before the deputies currently. And this has only been enhanced by the switch from MNLARS to MnDrive, the additional workloads that have been put onto us, and quite frankly, stagnant filing fees over the last 10 years. The filing fees are the only thing that generate any type of income for these offices, and that must cover all of their costs, from labor to equipment and everything in between. We view 2183 as a very good framework based on last year's conference committee agreement that unfortunately stalled out at the end of session. And this is a good starting point to finally conclude and hopefully get us on the right footing going forward. And we look forward to working with you, Mr. Chair, committee members, and especially the author, to make sure that the final product this year will certainly satisfy and take care of our needs going forward. And with that, I will conclude my remarks and certainly welcome any questions.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Hurst, in this bill, I think there's still some question or clarity on the difference between full service provider, those that are both a deputy registrar as well as a driver's license agent. Are there any out there that are still just a deputy registrar and not a driver's license? And how would this bill impact them?
Thank you,
First.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Petersburg. Thank you for bringing that question forward. Currently, every office is a deputy registrar and has an identifying number with the department that identifies them by number as to being a deputy registrar. In addition to that, every office also has what is called a driver's license agent number. Now, a deputy registrar office does all of the motor vehicle work, such as your tabs and titles. A driver's license agent is required to do the driver's license transactions. However, within the driver's license agents, you have either a full or limited agent. And the difference there is a full agent does everything from renewals to if you lose your card during the middle of a cycle, you can come in and request a replacement. Whereas the limiteds can only do replacement cards during the current cycle. And the reason for that is because the state supplies the camera and the eye exam equipment for the full-service offices. And historically, the department viewed that it was not necessary for every office to be a full license agent office, because if they were in close proximity to an existing state exam office, for example, there was really no need to have that equipment cost that the state would bear for supplying it to these offices. Furthermore, if there was another existing full-service driver's license agent in close proximity to that office, there was no need to have that equipment cost borne on each individual office. Where it comes into play with this bill, and especially the King report, is it is encouraging all offices to become a full-service provider, meaning they would be a full-service driver's license agent. And while that is certainly admirable for customer service across the state, a number of offices, roughly 50 of them, are limited agents. And while the legislation also proposes covering the cost for providing the camera and eye exam equipment, for example, there's also other considerations that offices in this situation would have to cover on their own, such as building out to accommodate the space, training staff to be able to do this type of service, which of course is a cost. And if it is tied to sharing any type of revenue with the state, some offices are going to be put in a very hard position to have to make outlays of perhaps $50,000 so that they could participate in a pool where they would maybe get back $10,000. And I'm just pulling those numbers out as examples. But those are some clarifications that need to be done with this legislation so that we are mindful of this type of situation and perhaps grant exemptions in these cases.
Mr. Chair, may I
Representative Petersburg.
just to clarify, because the question that I really wanted to get to was, under this bill, the determination or the definition of full-service provider is one who is appointed by the commissioner as both deputy register and driver's license agent. It sounds like you said that they are. Whether or not they actually use it or not is another thing for consequence, but technically they do have a number for both the deputy registrar as a driver's license agent. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Petersburg, that is correct. However, we want to make sure that there's clarification and that in the end there isn't any confusion where the limited driver's license agents would not be able to participate. So we just want to be careful on that aspect.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any other questions? Representative Elkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to, add to that, in the King report, one of the reasons why they were recommending that the additional cross-subsidy be limited to full services, because where we really need the capacity is in the processing of things like real IDs that only the full service operators perform. And the authors of the report didn't feel that that there would be an incentive for limited services offices to become full-service offices if that financial incentive wasn't provided.
Okay, thank you, Representative Elkins. Our next testifier is Julie Hansen, and she's here on behalf of Scott County and the Minnesota Association of County Officers.
See you again.
Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Julie Hansen. I am the Property and Customer Service Manager for Scott County. One of the hats I wear is Deputy Registrar, and I'm testifying today on behalf of Scott County, the Minnesota Association of County Officers, and also MICA, the Minnesota Inter-County Association. I want to thank Representative Elkins for bringing this bill forward, Chair Hornstein and Representative Elkins both for your continued support. We've been here at the legislature for years now asking for relief. As Representative Elkins mentioned previously, public entities across the state are having to pass along the financial responsibility of operating their deputy offices to their tax levies and ultimately their individual taxpayers. Our organizations remain committed to a solution that makes us whole and look forward to working with the author, the chair, and your counterparts in the Senate to get this across the line. Thank you, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Any questions for Ms. Hansen? Okay. Is there anyone in the public who wishes to testify that's not on our list? Yeah, I can. Okay, members, any discussion, any questions? Again, we're laying the bill over. Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think overall, I think this goes a long ways to getting us where we're at, and I've been in conversation with Representative Elkins earlier as we put it together and kind of continued on with before, and with some of the senators as well. Mr. Hurst just came to me and shared with me his view, and I agree with him that a full service provider are, even though you may have the deputy register number and the driver's license agent, it goes on to say under Chapter 171, who provides all driver services are included as full service provider, which when you add that into it, that does make some changes into the fee collections. And so I would then indicate that according to the language, then that 50 cents that gets moved back and forth, that would not apply to them. So they would be able to keep that according to this, because they aren't a full service provider. And it specifically says only full service providers need to send that 50 cents off. So there's some few things that maybe we still need to work out. None of them are large. I mean, they're all things that can be done, but that's another area that needs to be done. But I think this is a great start. I appreciate moving it forward. And the department has some issues that sounds like are minimal as well. And but we're running out of time, so we need to work on them. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Petersburg. And let me just make a couple of comments. I agree with you on many of your statements, and I think I've identified sort of 5 areas that I think we could work on here before next week. One is, again, as I had mentioned, getting some kind of compromise arrangement on the fee sharing. I think there's elements of the reporting requirements that I would be interested in that need to be prioritized. I think the question you asked, Representative Petersburg, about full service providers, is a good one, and I think needs to be addressed. And then, I've heard different ideas around fees. And the governor certainly has some ideas in his bill, and I think we'll take a look at that. I think, in fact, we'll kind of probably mix and match ideas from the governor's recs and this one. And then there's a very important one that I really want to provide some specific direction on. On page 11, lines 25 through 31, there's discussion about driver exam stations. And on this one, I'm going to be very clear that I side with the governor's recs on this. In the budget presentation that they gave us, there was a directive to keep open all 93 stations and to be very, specific about that. Whereas I think this language is a little less specific, and so I would, it would be my preference and advice to change 25 to 31, and we'll probably use the governor's language for that one. So those are the kind of 5 issues I think that we've identified through this hearing, which has been very helpful to take a look at, and look forward to more discussion on this when we discuss our overall omnibus bill. And with that, members, do you have any final comments, Representative Elkins?
Just really briefly, I mean, the bill as introduced reflects the agreement that had been reached between the House and the Senate at the end of the session last year. So the Senate has already started tinkering with it. We have ongoing informal discussions that will continue, but I think we're close enough that we're going to be able to work this out.
I'm very confident of that as well.
Yep.
And again, a lot of appreciation for your a lot of hard work on this. And with that, members, we are laying over House File 2183.